Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is it recordable? And this is your 2026 OSHA Playbook for how it is that you can turn compliance really into that competitive advantage. So my name is Holly Foxworth. I'm a registered nurse, and I am the Director of Marketing Communications here at Axiom, and I'm actually going to be your host today. So it looks like that there's still maybe a few of you that are still joining us. So while we're doing that, why don't you guys tell us where you're coming from and what you're drinking on at the moment. Tell us what you're sipping on. Put it there in the chat. Let's see what we've got going. We'll give them just maybe one more minute to join. As for me, I'm in Texas and I actually have water. I don't know if you can see that or not. That's a new one for me. Usually I have a soft drink love. And so that was one of my goals this year. So was to replace some of those with water. So if you guys see me with a red Coke in my hand, just hold me accountable. You can tell me. Let's see. Oh man, where all do we have? Okay. So coming from all different directions. That's fantastic. Good deal. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. In terms of what it is that we want to really convey to you guys is that today's session, it really kind of goes into what is that gray area that things get lost, things, fall by the wayside. And that's the area that's behind the OSHA recordability. So that's where you're seeing some of the issues with judgment calls. You're seeing some of those documentation errors, anything about, decisions, even though they're well-intended sometimes. All of those things really escalate quickly into such as, citations. You may see that you're getting unwarranted OSHA attention. Some are even having some penalties. So that's really what we wanted to find is go through that area, kind of give you some tips and tricks and help you understand what's going on so that by the end of today's session, that our goal is really to make sure that you have that clear understanding how it is that OSHA thinks, making sure that you're evaluating cases consistently. You're not doing one thing with one case and one with the other, and really how it is that you can turn that record keeping accuracy into a strategic advantage for your organization. So to help us navigate that, we do have quite a few joining us today. We have a panel of 3. We have Dr. Scott Cherry, who is our Chief Medical Officer. We have Dara Wheeler, who is our Chief Marketing Officer and EVP of Product. And then we also have a new face that you guys may not have met before, which is Tom West, and he is the VP of Global Practice leader there at Makusafe. So we were just chatting with him previously to joining this, and he was telling us about the book that he had read and all the amazing things that they're doing there with some of the wearable technology. So anyways, we're excited to hear about that from them. One thing I will tell you is let's go over kind of what you're seeing here. There, right in the first top right-hand corner of your screen there, you should see the box, and that is for our biggest webinar that we have every year. Everybody loves to attend, and everybody always has lots of friends that are wanting to ask questions about marijuana. It's never you, it's always a friend, but those are really fun webinars. It's usually our highest attendance event every year. Everybody brings great questions, but we're going to really be diving into the side of drug testing. So that's the actual title of it, is marijuana and drug testing and what's going to protect you and what may sink you this year. So definitely it's going to be here on February the 5th. We'll do that at 1:00 p.m. Central. And again, all you need to do is just click that button there on the top right-hand side of your screen. That'll get you registered. You don't have to enter any additional information. It'll send you a calendar invite, and we will look forward to seeing you then this next month. In addition to that, I do like to give away gifts if you guys aren't aware of that yet. And I tend to do that for those that are most engaged in our chat channel. So make sure that you're engaged, that you're putting your thoughts in there, any kind of stories that you want to share, any questions you want to ask of any of our presenters. That is the place to do it. And you can also interact with your fellow colleagues that are here. So that is the place that I go to look for who has had the most activity in these webinar events, and I like to send gifts. So if you like gifts, that's where you need to be today. We do have something that's new this year, and that is our continuing education credits. We were actually credentialed by SHRM to be a recertification provider. So you do have the option of receiving the 1 continuing ed credit for this hour that you're going to be spending with us. the way that you would do that and to be able to get that credit would be that you would need to stay throughout the duration of the event and then just complete the 4-question survey. So there's not a quiz, there's not anything in addition that you need to fill out, there's no forms. You just need to make sure you complete the survey, and then within 24 hours, you guys will receive an email that will have a link in there, and you'll be able to download your certificate there immediately. As always, we do record these events, so don't worry about taking frantic notes or writing. We will keep all of it there, and you can review that. And then in addition to that, there's some additional resources that are located there at the bottom about today, about everything that's going on. So with that being said, let's go ahead and meet our panel, and I will start with Dr. Cherry.
Thanks, Holly. My name is Scott Cherry. I'm Axiom Medical's Chief Medical Officer. My professional background is I'm a board certified occupational environmental medicine physician, also received training in preventive medicine and public health. I've been supporting really industrial, corporate, and military operations for the past 20 years. And for this discussion, actually, I did rotate through OSHA as a medical resident at the Department of Labor in DC. So I was actually able to kind of spend some time where a lot of this policy and enforcement is occurring.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Cherry. How about you, Ms. Wheeler?
Thanks, Holly. I am drinking sparkling water from my local HEB today. So good job on your health initiative. My name is Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's Chief Marketing and Product Officer. This is officially my 20th year at Axiom, and I am really excited about that. I love what we do, and I love supporting our clients. Thank you all for participating and engaging in the chat. We'll get you going, and I really appreciate Tom joining us today.
Absolutely. All right, and the man of the hour, Mr. Tom West, tell us about you.
Well, thanks very much. I'm Tom West, big bottle of water on my desk. I'm Vice President and Global Practice Leader here at Makusafe. And we're a wearable technology or connected worker, sensor-based technology company. We're located in Des Moines, Iowa, so you guys think it's cold in Texas. You don't know what you're talking about. It's very cold here. And I spend most of my time sort of being our leader, speaking and presenting at conferences, doing a lot of this webinar podcast type stuff, and really engaging with our industrial clients on the front lines about their implementation of wearable technology and how they can use the data and insights and patterns and trends to make better informed decisions about keeping their workers safe.
That is fantastic. And what is the name of your book? We were talking about that earlier, that you and the founders had put together.
Yeah, had I known it was going to take 1.5 years of my nights and weekends, I don't know that I would have said yes. But CRC Press publisher reached out to us a couple of years ago and asked us to write a book about this space because this is an emerging use of technology. It's called Safety and Wearable Technology, Impact, Applications, and Implementation in Industry. And if that may be of interest to you, it can be found on Amazon. It really turned into a book about leadership and culture and engagement and participation and people. I mean, you can have the greatest technology in the world, but unless people are willing to use it and you can use the data to make better business decisions, then it's not going to do anybody any good.
Absolutely. Very well said, Mr. West. You're exactly right. Well, whenever we talk about OSHA record keeping, some of those troubled spots, they aren't usually the rules themselves. Everyone usually understands what the rules are. Where we run into problems is when you have those judgment calls that we make in the moment. So something that really seems minor and someone assumes that they've maybe seen it before, suddenly you've got 2 different cases with very different documentation that goes along with that. So that is what really gets OSHA's attention, is the inconsistency part. that inconsistency is really what raises their eyebrows. It's going to get their attention. And whether that's just, a single log entry or it's something that just stands out. Usually what that is something that is different. That's where we're going with this, is that consistency is huge this year. So we definitely want to put a significant priority on that. But what we want to do is talk through with you how it is that OSHA makes those decisions. And we do have a fun game that we're playing today. So I hope that you came prepared to participate, because you're not going to get a lecture. You're definitely going to get to play the game. But we'll play, is it recordable? We'll do that after we go through some of the updates for OSHA. And those are going to be some real world scenarios. That's a mouthful. Scenarios of cases that have occurred, and we'll ask you what your thoughts are, whether you think that they would be recordable or not, and then give you the rationales behind that. So with that being said, Dr. Cherry, I'll come to you first and ask you, break it down and tell us how it is that OSHA really kind of makes those decisions. Walk us through what that logic is. What does that look like whenever they're reviewing a case?
Sure. And I kind of like to think about it in the sense of OSHA recordability needs kind of a certain severity of illness or injury, and did it happen at work, or is it attributable to the work environment? And OSHA has some very specific language and guidance on that. And so one we can just think of, is there actually an injury or illness that happened in the workplace, or that the workplace contributed to? And then if there is kind of this work relatedness component, then it really depends on a couple of things subsequent to that. The level of treatment by which that injury or illness is needed. And so OSHA describes, they describe OSHA recordability through, instead of determining, or I'll just call it as medical treatment beyond first aid. So they actually don't define that. They define it by exclusion, where what is first aid. And there's about 13 or 14 explicit first aid treatments that OSHA approves. And so I think a lot of us are aware of kind of using over-the-counter medications versus prescription strength at the same level. But then there's also like the rigid splints versus a soft splint. Vaccines like tetanus are considered first aid, but all other vaccines are not. And so there's really kind of this very specific list that a lot of us hang our hats on, knowing kind of detail by detail. The other side of it, actually, you can have first aid treatments, but if the level of injury invokes a disposition that does not keep that employee at work, then you also then will become OSHA recordable. So if you have days away from work, a transfer, obviously hospitalizations, things like that. And so you kind of have to work your way through all of this logic pathway. And then, additionally, they are looking at if you have a policy and it's driven by, a process versus kind of inconsistency.
Okay. Tom, talk to us about what's changing in 2026. What do we have to look forward to? I noticed that we had several that were here in the chat, and we're talking about that they were new to the industry. Some asking, how it is that they're filling out reports and things of that sort. So tell us what's going on this year and what we need to be focused on.
Yeah, thanks. From my perspective, we talk about OSHA and compliance being important, but really they're the floor. They're not the strategy. Data and leading indicators are how mature organizations can actually manage risk. OSHA record keeping used to really be about compliance, but the future of EHS management, I think in 2026 and beyond, it's becoming more and more about organizational credibility. Once data is submitted electronically, it might not just be stored anymore. It may be analyzed, compared, questioned. What's changing is scrutiny, consistency, and the expectation of proof. So when it comes to scrutiny, your numbers are being looked at more closely. Differences between sites can now raise questions, I think, for OSHA based on what I've seen. Organizations are expected to show why they are making the decisions they're making in their safety management practices. And that's where leading indicators and objective data can really matter in the future. They validate the logic behind your decision making. They show safety actions were performed and informed and not reactive. And they show that you were managing risk before injuries occurred. Lagging data, I talk about all the time, explains what happened, but leading data explains what you were doing to prevent it. And that can have an impact on, in our case, with wearable sensors, everything from heat exposure to physical strain and exertion, near miss activities being recorded automatically, environmental hazards, industrial hygiene concerns, worker reported frontline observations and risks. So when agencies, insurers, or attorneys look at your records, the question is no longer, did you log it right? It may become, what did you know? When did you know it? What did you do with that knowledge? Documenting what almost happened can even be more powerful than documenting what already did happen. That can demonstrate awareness, action, and responsible risk management. And importantly, I think data, I get this question all the time, data doesn't replace the professional judgment of EHS managers. It strengthens it, it protects it, and it documents why we're doing the things we're doing, the intelligence behind it. So OSHA compliance shows you met the minimum. Use of leading indicators and objective data to make more informed decisions can actually show you were managing risk more effectively. In 2026, I think that distinction matters more than ever.
Absolutely. Excellent points. I like what you said about the judgment piece, is that if we look at our data from a different perspective, it really can tell a story. And I'm sure that that's what you guys convey to your clients as well, is that, this really gives you an idea of what's going on with your employees throughout not just their day, but on a longer cycle as well. Would that be correct, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. True evidence-based decision-making and more effective and efficient EHS management.
Yeah, excellent. Well, why don't we move to stress test some of these things that we're talking about here. And I'm seeing this chat and I'm loving every minute of it. You guys are asking some great questions. I love that you're asking each other and that you're all responding to each other. So that is fantastic. I think that some of these will be covered in our scenarios. So I'll wait until we get there to be able to push those through. So let's go to our first one here. Let's see. What we're going to do is I'll have Dara read the question and we'll make a decision. Everybody, that's where you're going to put into the chat. Do you think it's recordable or it's not recordable? And then we'll discuss it. And so that you have that knowledge base. We're not just preaching at you. You get to see it in real life and what a real scenario would look like. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dara, and let you go through these questions with us.
Okay, get ready. Is it recordable?
I'm ready.
Scenario number 1, off-site team building event. A 29-year-old employee attends an employer-organized off-site team building event at a bowling alley. While bowling, she slips and twists her ankle. X-rays are negative. An ankle immobilizer is applied. Ice and OTC medication are recommended, and she returns to work the next day with no restrictions. Is this recordable? OTC, over the counter, just for all of you newer.
We're getting some answers. I'm seeing recordable, only recordable if used for closure, not recordable. Okay, so some different answers here. That was interesting. One said recordable because of the x-ray. Okay. Dr. Sharif, what do you think that this one is? Tell us what the answer is here and why.
Okay, so like bottom line up front, just to not keep people in suspense, it's recordable the easiest to go to infraction would be, or the threshold would be the ankle immobilizer. So that's kind of a rigid support. And so you can kind of support an ankle sprain and not cause it to go medical treatment beyond first aid if you use like an ACE bandage and things like that. If it was a fracture, then that would be considered a significant injury and could be considered recordable based on a significant injury. What's interesting is one of the questions comments talked about the X-ray. So diagnostic imaging, like an X-ray, is allowed, just as a kind of, just to be sure it does not invoke medical treatment beyond first aid, but it does kind of feel like it potentially could go there. And then what's interesting is the bowling alley, right? It's like not necessarily at the work environment, but if it's an employee sponsored event, then that's what covers that activity.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. And I think that's one that some get stuck on, is the concept of, just as you mentioned, about it being a non-work type of event, that you would think that it's not at the workplace, but it's somewhere else. But just because the employer is sponsoring that, then that does make it work related there. So absolutely, recordable is the correct answer. Let's move on to the next one. Dara.
And one quick note, and I think Scott said this really well, but just we get into a lot of nuance between OSHA recordable versus a work comp claim. And they are kind of two, compensable and recordable are two very different things. And so sometimes one can be recordable and compensable, or there could be some nuance there depending upon the comp policy and your state and different things. So, okay, next scenario.
Hey, Dara,
laceration. Yeah.
Hey, before we get to that, can we answer that one question that had came up, because it was about the splint specifically? I was going to ask if Dr. Cherry could talk about the splint. There was a question on, can you talk about why that splint was specifically making that recordable?
Sure. And so, this is just explicitly in the OSHA regulation. OSHA defines medical treatment beyond first aid as any medical treatment that's not part of the first aid list. And so they one of the line items on the regulation is rigid support, splinting. And so, it has to be soft. So really the ACE bandage is kind of the cutoff. If you see anything else that has any kind of additional support besides compression, then it's going to be considered medical treatment beyond first aid. So it's very nuanced, and it's a great question.
Absolutely.
Because it could be a very small ankle sprain. It could be just a grade 1 ankle sprain. And, a lot of times people don't even use these treatments, right? It's on for just that moment. They're in the clinic and then they rip it off. So, we want to make sure that the medical treatment is appropriate. And we also want to make sure the providers are aware of some of that nuance,
Absolutely. There was one more that was asking about, was it specifically, they were asking, would there be a question of whether the immobilizer would be mentioned in the doctor's notes, or how would they be able to determine that? So where would they get that information from?
It would be in the doctor's notes. So I think, there is going to be a paper trail that is probably auditable, to some exhaustive level. It definitely should be in the provider's notes, if it is a complete note.
Okay, good deal. We've got quite a few of these, so buckle up. All right, Dara.
Okay. Scenario 2, laceration with antibiotic ointment. The scenario, a 51-year-old maintenance tech sustains a superficial cut at work. The wound is clean, bandaged on site. Later, the employee applies an over-the-counter antibiotic appointment at home. No prescriptions or restrictions are issued. Is this recordable?
It's a good one. I'm seeing not recordable. No. Seems to be overwhelmingly not recordable.
Mm.
Yeah. Tom, what do you think this one is?
I would defer to the experts at Axiom, but in my mind, this is first aid only. So
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Dr. Cherry, you want to talk to us why this is specifically a first aid and it would not be a recordable?
Right. And so all the rules we've talked about, if one of the criteria is not met, then the whole thing is not recordable. And so, this meets work relatedness. It meets a true injury. Now, let's see if it has medical treatment beyond first aid or if it's dispositioned as not full duty. And so no restrictions were issued. And really the only medical treatment is over the counter. And so this is not recordable based on that.
Accurate. Okay. All right, dear, number 3.
Shoulder injury with diagnostic imaging. A 42-year-old employee reports shoulder pain after lifting materials at work. A physician orders an MRI to rule out a rotator cuff injury. MRI is negative. No prescriptions, therapy, or restrictions are issued. Is this recordable?
Okay, so somebody's having an MRI.
While we're addressing that, there was a couple questions about, does the work activity matter? If it's optional, if it's not, if it's required. And some of that nuance, I think, also goes to compensability versus recordability. So sometimes it might be some different components that might make it not work related. From a compensability standpoint, OSHA tends to treat things a little differently. But Dr. Cherry, any opinions on whether it matters if we label it optional or not?
Yes, and I think where I see it the most is like a voluntary wellness program. It's not mandatory, so if it's mandatory, then it's OSHA or kind of work relatedness is attached to that if something happens. If it's voluntary, then it's not necessarily. But for this matter, where it's kind of a work event that's a social setting, that is work related. And the way I think of it is, say if someone doesn't participate, there's kind of like this negative implication of not being a team player or things like that. So that's kind of how I think of it. But it's usually with wellness programs that there's optionality to it as kind of the controlling or gating factor.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have a lot of questions here. There were questions, did the worker report the incident? These are all really good questions. Dr. Sharif, what is the answer on this one? Is it recordable or not recordable?
So here we have someone that has some shoulder symptoms, had to get pretty significant imaging through an MRI, no prescriptions or therapy or restrictions issued, full duty. So I would say this is not recordable, but I think this is a great discussion point for talking about OSHA recordability versus workers' compensation and compensability. So, this injury went to a clinic, and, an MRI is not cheap in America. So most likely a workers' comp claim is going to be generated here. So in general, even myself, if I see there's a robust workers' comp claim, it kind of feels like on the OSHA recordability side, it should be recordable. But these are kind of, they're analogous, but very different. They're very different legal systems that are at play here. You have the OSHA federal standards, which are federal law that are promulgated not through Congress, but through Department of Labor for kind of history buffs. And then workers' comp is a legal process that has its own working law. So that's why I think sometimes you kind of blend OSHA recordability with workers' comp claim. And so this would most likely be a workers' comp claim, but it to the letter of the law does not meet the OSHA recordability standard.
Okay. So as long as we're using that for diagnostic purposes only, then
Yes.
You're saying that would not be recordable, correct?
Right. Yes.
All right.
In fact,
Okay.
what's nice is an MRI is very sensitive for like a rotator cuff tear or any kind of shoulder pathology. So having a clear MRI actually really supports kind of the full return to duty and things like that. So although it's very costly and it may have a claim, it supports the safety side, so to speak, for non-recordability.
Good point. All right, Dara, let's go to the next one, number 4.
Hey, removed from job due to policy. A food manufacturing employee sustains a minor finger puncture treated with first aid only. The employee can perform all job duties, but the company food safety policy removes them from the production line for 3 shifts. Is this reportable?
That's a tricky one. So you have an employee that had a puncture wound there to the finger. They can work okay, but we're telling them, or the employer, you are telling them that they can't work for 3 shifts. Is that recordable? Looks like we're seeing both. Dr. Cherry, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, this is probably one of the more challenging ones. And as I review these for clients, I quickly, as I'm reading through it, it's like, okay, it's leaning towards OSHA recordability or it's not. And this one, because any alteration in duty status really makes us kind of immediately flip to OSHA recordability based on the disposition of the employee's duty status. It makes us kind of go there, but you actually have to look at the whole picture. And again, this person wasn't removed from their full duties from a medical perspective. It really was a safety, or I don't want to use the word safety in this realm, but in food, I would say food safety, where they don't want the potential for any kind of contaminants to go into that food clean area. So that, food and safety policies are very strict about not having any kind of wounds in the workplace that are open or fresh. And so this is a tricky one, but it's really from the food safety component, not from medical safety.
So for clarification then, this definitely would not be recordable, and it's not a lost time with that employee being taken off for those 3 shifts, correct?
Yeah, that's a great summary, yes.
Okay. We do have a question that I thought this was great. Rebecca was asking, comparing compensability and recordable. If a claim is denied by work comp due to lack of sufficient evidence, et cetera, and the claim cannot be determined to be having occurred at work, would this potentially be recordable if the employee went to a clinic and was placed on restrictions? Great question.
Yeah, I really like discussing kind of these parallel systems, and I've seen every mismatch, so to speak. So, you have an OSHA recordable, a claim that's OSHA recordable, an injury that's OSHA recordable and compensable under workers' comp. And then I've seen it where they're both denied, right? It's not recordable and it's not compensable, but I've also seen where something is OSHA recordable, but administratively fails the workers' comp compensability component and vice versa. So I would definitely, all of us working in this field, they should kind of be consistent, but they don't have to be. And so just there's some nuance in several things. So, you can have actually a fairly significant injury that still is kind of under medical treatment or just under first aid, but still is going to go into workers' comp. Like a perfect example would be that shoulder injury where it was only first aid, but probably is going to need workers' comp to pick up the clinic and MRI costs.
Good points. There was one question in here that Teresa asked that I thought was good. She was asking about what if they were not allowed to work and they had to stay home? How would you recommend? And Dara, you may want to chime in on this. You have with your HR background as well, where you're taking them off of their regular duties and perhaps they're having to stay at home. Do you think that employers would typically pay them for that during that time period since it's their policy, or how would you address that?
Yeah, I mean, it would just depend upon policy. But if the injury was such that the physician, the clinician that saw the employee put them on restricted duty or lost time, it would be at the clinician level. So in this scenario, this employee would have left the job site, gone into a clinic, and been given job duty status from a clinician who decides that their injury warrants taking time off work. So it's a little different. And then the paying part, that's back to the compensability standpoint, depends upon the comp policy for that employer.
Good questions. These are really good. I like what Ashley said, explaining this to corporate is a nightmare. You're exactly right. One more question there was, let's see, Alicia had asked, it looks like this one is about falling, but we can go ahead and answer it. She was asking if the employee falls on ice, landing on the back of their head, reports that they think that they blacked out because their eyes opened afterwards and thought, how long have I been laying here? The employee was transported to the hospital, had no issues, no treatment, no restrictions. The employer states not recordable because no one saw the employee's loss of consciousness because nobody witnessed the fall. So can an employer use that as reasoning? That's a great question.
Yeah, some of my thoughts on this, so if they were hospitalized overnight, that usually at least invokes like OSHA reportability, like you at least have to report that happened. Loss of consciousness is also, that requirement. And so for recordability, depending on, again, if they went to the ER or if they were hospitalized, they may have gotten some treatments that are beyond first aid. We would have to kind of know more details there. But loss of consciousness and hospitalization are definitely huge red flags for OSHA.
For sure, yeah. Let's see. And there was one that came up about an ortho specialist surgeon, and I think that this plays to who gets to rule the roost in terms of doctors here. We've had this one come up, but it was saying, how do you handle a specialist like an orthopedic surgeon that's giving restrictions, but then the employee goes into a MedExpress clinic for a fit for duty physical and they're cleared with no restrictions? How do you manage conflicting doctor's notes from two different providers?
That is really good. The way I understand that, there's kind of this hierarchy of authority for physicians or providers. So the easier example, and we can build upon that, is say you have an orthopedic injury and you have like a general provider and then an orthopedic specialist. Usually the orthopedic specialist should have more credence. It's ultimately up to the safety department to decide like which one to take ultimately. But in general, that kind of is the case. For this specific example, you could actually still, if it's an occupational medicine specialist doing the return to work, you could consider them the highest authority for return to work. And there's obviously a lot of background work where that provider will probably consult with the treating orthopedic specialist to try to bring everything in together, like the specifics of the treatment and their concerns versus the work environment, the physical demands of the job, things like that. But it is a nuanced position. And I would say this reminds me, when you have a very difficult case, you want to have a team's approach that's multidisciplinary, that has HR, legal, risk, safety, medical. You really want a team approach that is kind of in this iterative process we see in the Americans with Disability Act for reasonable accommodation, but I think it applies to any complex case management.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. We'll do one more and then we'll get back on our others. I see lots of good questions that are coming through here, but I think that we have them listed in the individual scenario, so I won't jump the gun, but I will ask this last one. Is it recordable if the employee injures himself beyond first aid, maybe resulting in hospitalization, but due to the employee's negligence, like being under the influence of a dangerous controlled substance? So they were under the influence of a substance and they sustained an injury.
So this is another great example of workers' comp versus OSHA recordable. If I remember all the details, it sounds like this would be OSHA recordable, but there's probably enough legal evidence to have the workers' comp case either administratively denied or at least significantly reduce the benefits if there's evidence of under the influence that was of the, if it's the employee taking some kind of illicit or inappropriate substance.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one, Ms. Dara. We'll go with number 5.
Acute stress after near miss. A 38-year-old equipment operator witnesses a near miss involving falling material. No physical injury occurs. A mental health professional diagnoses acute stress reaction and recommends 3 days away from work. Is this reportable?
I like this one. This one's tricky.
Yeah.
Definitely tricky. Let's see.
We should just ask the audience for this one.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Yeah, they all say they're saying yes, and most are saying yes. Dr. Sherry, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the wisdom of the crowd, it's hard to beat that, right? And I think this is a great discussion point too, because I think this space is like 99% focused on physical injuries, and I think even in military medicine or even in general civilian medicine, physical health has kind of dominated and mental health is lagging because it's invisible, right? And it's probably been taboo for many decades, but this is a nice highlight of how important mental health is as well. And so, yeah, if you have basically a medical provider issuing restricted duty, then it would be considered OSHA recordable. I do think it's a paradigm shift though, right? Like, this was a near miss, so, what's going on here? But there is definitely, I've seen cases where people have not been involved in a traumatic incident, but had to manage it after the fact and have had, sequela or, subsequent issues since then from that workplace exposure.
Mm-hmm. So the key differentiator here, would you say, is that they had a formal diagnosis then from a clinician that said that this is work-related, that stress is work-related, and taking them off? Is that what you would utilize?
Right. And yes, so even just having them say 3 days off of work, would indicate that, with the mechanism of injury being, the exposure at work.
Okay. Before we run to the next one, we had one more that came through from Michelle, was asking, can you comment on over-the-counter medications that are written at prescription strengths, such as ibuprofen? This is one we always love to talk about.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm
this
as well.
This may be the most prevalent kind of unforced error, like in baseball, like where it's a minor injury and there's no restricted duty, and the provider, gives like 800 milligrams of Motrin, or even, was it at prescription strength or just over the counter strength? Was it a prescription?
They're written at prescription strength, so I would assume that they're talking maybe like an 800 milligram ibuprofen. They actually wrote it out instead of
so this really, you can, I've seen many instances where they try to get this to not be recordable, but, to the letter of the law, it is recordable. I would even suggest even the stronger dose of ibuprofen isn't more effective than the over-the-counter dose. And so it's actually doubly painful for me to see happening, because the company's safety record gets dinged, and then it's actually not helping the patient really in average, you know.
Mm-hmm. Tom, anything you've seen that you wanted to add to this?
I don't have to deal with these decisions on a daily basis. I'm really learning an awful lot about these nuanced situations from Scott and Dara. Yeah, I agree with where they're falling on making these decisions.
Yeah, Tom, it sounds like you live in kind of the pure preventive medicine play, right? The primary prevention. So you're trying to prevent all this from happening. All this discussion of nuance is dealing with kind of navigating these margins of where the thresholds are in all of these regulations and things like that. So, you know, at Axiom, we try to help everywhere: primary prevention before someone's injured, secondary prevention, early symptoms, and then obviously if there's a true injury. But it sounds like you're kind of in that the ivory tower, so to speak, which is great, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it'll be a great day when we can
really prevent,
shift transformationally to predict and prevent. Yeah. But I have an awful lot of respect for the safety professionals that we deal with on a daily basis that have to make these decisions. And yeah, and sometimes they're extremely hard.
Yeah.
True story. Let's see. All right, let's go to the next one, Dara. And I saw that there was a question in here that's very similar to this. It wasn't this exact scenario, but there was a question that was related to it. So I think that this may answer the question.
Okay, suspected heat illness versus diabetes. A delivery driver reports headache, nausea, and fatigue while working outdoors on an 82-degree day. Medical evaluation reveals uncontrolled diabetes with blood glucose of 340. IV fluids and insulin are administered. The employee discloses a prior diabetes diagnosis. Yeah, we had somebody ask about loss of consciousness being from low blood sugar or migraine instead of a work issue.
Yeah.
You know, so what I love about this example is, you know, we talked recently about, you know, pure physical, very, very, very objective, like there's an injury, and then mental health, which is kind of invisible injury, but with some change in behaviors or performance. But, you know, what's interesting is diabetes, which is very high blood sugar, kind of bridges those two gaps. Because here, like if you see someone pass out at the workplace, you're thinking, you know, heart attack or heat stroke or heat exhaustion. And there can be a few other things like seizures. But this truly is a pure medical and probably personal medical issue. So there is value in kind of having additional insight into the case beyond just someone passed out at the workplace and they've been sent to the hospital and we don't know what happened, because this, without additional information of the diabetes, could look like OSHA recordable and reportable, because you have kind of a concern about loss of consciousness. But just to keep it, you know, the summary here is this is a personal medical issue that just happens to manifest at the workplace. So it's not OSHA recordable.
Absolutely. And the reverse side of that, Dr. Cherry, too, is that we've seen cases that the employer assumed that it was personal, and it turns out that it was work related and turned out to be recordable. So would you agree that that's why it's important to treat every single case as if it is work related in the very beginning, to get that established from the start, and then you can rule out at a later point whether that's actually of a personal nature?
Right. In some ways, we kind of just, from our view, is you treat, you know, every incident kind of goes through the standard process. So you treat every case the same, because you can have something that looks minor. It could be life-threatening, whether it's personal or work-related, and vice versa. And so if you just have a consistent process, then the best outcome across the whole population can occur. We've seen things such as a very small injury, like a paper cut or a small laceration, that in general, you probably wouldn't go see a provider if it happened at home. But because of personal medical conditions, they might, someone with really uncontrolled diabetes, they're at much higher risk for infection. And so, what looks like something minor in the at the onset can turn into a large workers' comp claim that can be kind of extended if it has, personal medical issues feeding into the injury later on.
Good point. Good point. All right, let's go on to number 7.
Audiogram threshold shift. An employee's annual audiogram shows a confirmed standard threshold shift. The employee works in a noise exposed role, but it reports frequent recreational noise exposure. Is this reportable?
Dr. Cherry, I just picture you when I think of this. I just think of you like younger in a band and like, drums going off or something where it's so loud for your ears.
Yeah, my hearing loss isn't from bands, but I was working on cars as a young person, and all the hydraulic and air supply tools, I think I was probably negligent in doing hearing protection.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we have a lot of different answers that are coming in here. There's some that are saying it depends, some say it's recordable, some say it's not. What do you say?
Hearing loss is probably one of the most common occupational medicine programs out there. It's probably one of the most popular or frequent workers' comp claims, at least in federal workers' comp. And I would suspect also OSHA recordable. And so just kind of on its face, you would say this is OSHA recordable. When I think of managing occupational health programs, the main thing you want to make sure is exposure validity. So a lot of times people will start out in a hearing conservation program because they were doing work in loud environments based on industrial hygiene data. But over time, they get promoted and stop working in those, but they keep getting the hearing test. And, so there is hearing loss associated with aging, which is actually a great thing that we all get older. But it can kind of muddy the waters of the sensitivity of these hearing exams based on work relatedness. But I would say this too, though, hearing loss is one of the only potential injuries or illnesses that can be dramatically affected by the provider's medical opinion. But I think just on this face, to keep it simple, it would be recordable.
All right.
If you don't mind me, if you don't mind me interjecting with something, these last couple of cases are obviously hard because they rely on interpretation, right? One of the things that we're able to talk to clients and organizations about and provide them with is data, objective data about exposures. If you, not these cases the way that they're written, but let's say an organization and a safety management team knows about, this sensitivity to sound, or maybe somebody's diabetic medical history. Now, unique, personalized data about what they experience every day can help arm those safety professionals with exactly, what to do for those workers to keep them out of harm's way. So we see things all the time like, a worker that comes in early on Thursdays and within the first hour or two of his shift achieves his, entire sound dosage allowance because of a piece of equipment that nobody was thinking about him working with. Or, somebody that's working behind a machine and experiencing high heat index all day long, right? That kind of real-time data from sensors can certainly help those safety professionals make more informed and better decisions about keeping those people safe.
Well, that's extremely pertinent, Tom, because, hearing conservation program, the way it's written in federal law is you do a general workplace survey, but it really does matter where you're at in that specific region, right? And so the provider is assessing like, okay, they're under this hearing conservation program. So the company's telling me they're at risk, but if they have an individualized sensor on them that can show their time weighted average is below 85 decibels, then it actually helps the provider say the hearing loss is not associated with workplace exposures. And it actually will validate, the company doesn't even have to pay for the actual every year hearing exam. So early in my career, I spent a lot of time validating occupational health programs because it helps kind of help the sensitivity and the effectiveness of these programs.
Yeah, one final comment on that. We don't advocate at all that data should be used to disprove something. On the other hand, gathering that data can be very helpful to management effectiveness, right? If we've got time and date stamped sound exposure data and we're a full noise dosimeter, we're monitoring sound in 7 different octaves and we can calculate a real-time time-weighted average for every employee. And now we've got wearable sensors on the arms of a workforce as they roam through outer space, so we can see trends and patterns over time. We have plenty of examples of organizations that are able to proactively and preventatively address problematic areas in their facility, or even justify capital expenditures on where to put equipment and what to do to mitigate risk in certain areas of their facility.
Good point. Good point. Let's see, Derek, you want to ask us about the chip tooth? I want to do rapid fire here so that we can make sure that they get all of them before their time is up.
Yeah, chip tooth, is it recordable or not? So no prescription, no follow-up, full duty. What do we think?
Yes.
I saw a few answers already.
Yes.
It is yes, it's a bone. So just like any broken bone, it would be considered recordable.
Absolutely. All right, let's see. Let's get to the next one about delayed reporting here.
Break room injury with delayed reporting. Employee slips and falls in the company break room while on break, bruising a hip. 2 days later, personal physician prescribes pain meds, recommends 2 days away from work. Is it reportable?
So
Yes.
several things that jump out to me here, is that piece about the break room. That's usually where we've seen that a lot of people get tripped up, is that even though they're on break, they're still at your organization. Yeah. Okay, let's see. All right, the next one.
Employee traveling overnight for work goes to a gym. While leaving the gym, employee slips and fractures an ankle. Is it reportable?
This is a big one. There were several questions in here that were asking about what that would be for when somebody's traveling. What's your thoughts, Dr. Cherry?
Yes, this has a lot of layers to it. So in general, if someone's traveling, for work, they pretty much are covered under workers' comp from kind of the time they leave to the time they return. But what's interesting is, if they're kind of traveling for multi-days, there's kind of this established residence, if they're in temporary lodging, to where they can do personal, there is times where they're doing personal related items like exercising, things like that. So I would say that no, it's not work related or not recordable as well.
You're exactly right. Yeah, because they established that residence then at the hotel is what you're saying. Then that would
Right.
not be considered recordable. Okay, good deal. Darren, Tom, talk us through where things kind of go wrong. Why it is that people lose these arguments and what they should be doing differently.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, sure. So in my opinion, based on what I've seen, I don't think employers lose record-keeping arguments because they acted in bad faith, but rather they lacked documentation or consistency or objective support for their decision. So some of these examples, right, we thought it was personal. That only works if you can prove there's an alternative cause. Without evidence, I think OSHA assumes work-relatedness, but again, I'll defer to the team. An opinion isn't enough. You need data to support or observations or documentations to support why you believed it wasn't work-related. Company policy. Policies don't override OSHA regulations, in my understanding. So internal review rules or policies about light duty or restrictions don't change OSHA recordability. To the best of my knowledge, OSHA looks at medical facts, not internal practices. You know, someone who declines treatment, I think here, again, based on my knowledge and what I've been exposed to, what matters is what was recommended by medical professionals, not what the employee accepted. I think Scott spoke to this earlier. Recommendation is what makes it recordable, even if treatment wasn't pursued. Didn't report it right away. This one just came up. You know, based on my background, I would say timing doesn't erase recordability. Late reporting is probably common. It doesn't change the outcome. Capable of working. You know, it's not required that somebody be disabled in order to be recordable. Modified work is still a restriction. So the biggest risk I see here in doing some, you know, thought and preparation for our talk today is inconsistency. Different supervisors, different sites, which we see all of the time in our work, may lead to different answers for the same scenario. And I think that can raise red flags. So I keep coming back to this, but safety data can be objective and can be powerful, creates a common source of truth, if you will, a common language, supports decision-making. And, you know, we talk all the time about replacing gut feelings and what we think with what we can show. So platforms and technologies like ours at Makusafe aren't probably too helpful in deciding recordability, but they can strengthen documentation. They can show risk exposure, conditions, near misses can be captured automatically. And that, you know, becomes a very, very powerful thing in the shift toward being more proactive and defending decisions. So, yeah.
Dr. Sherry, we're kind of at time here. We've reviewed all of these things in what we've kind of talked about, but what would you give our audience just one last parting thought as they're thinking about preparing their OSHA 300 and 300 A's, the 301s that are being done that they have to post and then submit in March?
So, you know, there's a lot of nuanced and details that we're all experts in managing, but I like to take the big picture view that these were kind of rules, you know, from decades ago that were trying to steer us from kind of the injury already happening and learning from it. So I think really having a process that looks at it holistically is really the best case, that doesn't let anything slip through the cracks, so to speak. That's kind of my gut check on this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you haven't already, make for sure that you click that reserve your seat button there at the upper right-hand side of your screen there, because we want to see you this next month to talk about all things marijuana and drug testing. So we thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you in February. Have a great day.